Hello, everyone. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day, everyone. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day and welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, Israel at War, a series featuring programs surrounding the evolving situation in Israel and the region, understanding the impact around the world, and sharing action items you can take from wherever you are. On Wednesday, Israel and Hamas reached a milestone agreement that would secure the release of 33 hostages over the coming weeks, marking a pivotal moment in the ongoing war. Joining us today on the ground in Israel to discuss these unfolding developments is AJC Jerusalem Director Lt Colonel Reserve Avital Leibovich. Avital will be in conversation with AJC's Chief Policy and Political Affairs Officer Jason Isaacson. After we hear from Jason and Avital, we will take your questions. You may email your questions to questions@ajc.org. That's questions plural, or you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Jason, turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Yesterday, after a seemingly interminable 467 days, the people of Israel and women and men of conscience around the world got the news that we've all been waiting for, that a deal has been reached to bring home the hostages brutally abducted from southern Israel by Hamas and other terrorists on October 7th, 2023, and held since then in unspeakable captivity in Gaza. As I expect everyone viewing today's webinar knows, of the 251 hostages, grandparents, women and men, children, babies, who were taken on October 7th, a number of them murdered in the process. Negotiations the following month resulted in the release of 108 back to Israel. Of those who remained, a number were freed in bold Israeli rescue missions. Bodies of others were found in the course of military operations, and an unknown number remain alive. It is reported that 98 hostages are still held in Gaza, not all of them living. In a negotiation led by the United States, Qatar, and Egypt that sputtered on and off for months and then intensified in recent weeks, it was agreed by Israeli authorities and what remains of the Hamas leadership that in the course of a ceasefire beginning this Sunday and continuing for the next 6 weeks, 33 living hostages in small groups spaced every few days would be released by Hamas, and Israel would at the same time release many hundreds of Palestinian security prisoners, a number of them serving life sentences for grave acts of terror. Further hostages, living and dead, in a second phase of the deal would commence, would be brought home, assuming that second phase of the deal were to put in place. And then still further negotiations would later be initiated on Gaza's future administration and reconstruction. As AJC said in a statement by our CEO, Ted Deutsch, yesterday, we welcome yesterday's announcement and praise the Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration for their dedication to bringing the hostages home. But we also know this horror story is far from over yet. As Ted said yesterday, we cannot wait to see the first hostages come home to their families. But the critical work to free every hostage, regardless of age, gender, or nationality, must continue. The international community must persist in its efforts to ensure that every hostage is reunited with their loved ones. To answer questions about the current deal and its implications, I'm fortunate to be joined by my colleague Avital Leibovich, Director of AJC Jerusalem, who has been in regular contact with hostage families, with government officials, and with longtime colleagues in the Israel Defense Forces throughout this ordeal. Thank you, Avital, for once again briefing our Advocacy Anywhere audience. To begin, I sketched out just the barest outlines of the ceasefire and hostage release deal. And I know that even in the course of the last few hours, there were some further questions about whether the deal was actually falling into place. But could you walk us through what's expected to transpire in the coming months in a little more detail?
Of course. Thank you, Jason. Let me take you to the drama before I begin talking about the agreement itself, let me take me to the drama of the last couple of hours. And actually, it began at 4 a.m. 4 a.m., the Prime Minister's office, Prime Minister of Israel, released an official statement saying that Hamas is backing from the original agreements, making the agreement difficult to reach. That was 4 a.m. Couple of hours later, 10:30 a.m., the same similar press briefing, again released by the Prime Minister's office. However, 10 minutes ago, I'm glad to say that negotiations succeeded. The bridges, the hurdles were bridged, and it seems that the agreement will be signed. Now let's talk about the agreement, and I'm basing my information on the draft of the agreement that has been passed to Palestinian sources. So we're talking about 3 phases of the agreement. The first phase is a phase that will last for 42 days. Those 42 days will include the release of women in the first stage, female hostages, civilian soldiers, hopefully children. And then this will be followed by men over 50 that will be released later in the course of the 42 days. On day 16, they will be beginning of talks with Hamas on the second phase, on implementation of the second phase. As you said, there are 98 hostages in Gaza. So if we subtract those 33, hopefully that will be released in those 42 days, we are remaining with 65. The Israeli policy says we wanted the second phase to have all those 65 back home, dead and alive as one. And the negotiations will continue all along those last 3 or 4 weeks of the first phase towards the second phase. The third phase, by the way, speaks about the renovation of Gaza, and that phase should last 3 to 5 years. So let's talk about the most interesting thing, and that is the first phase. So I spoke about those 33 hostages that will be released the first day, 3, after 4 more days, 4, and then every week there will be a few. We don't know the names. We have not received the names. The families have not yet been notified. Only tomorrow, the Israeli cabinet will ratify the agreement. The government will meet and again ratify the agreement, and only then we will be, or the government will rather, inform the relevant families. Now, there's a whole mechanism in the background working on preparations for absorbing the hostages. Hospitals, mental health experts. It's very clear that we are not in the same place where we were more than a year ago, because after 50 days, there were 105 hostages that came home. They were in a totally different shape than those which are hopefully coming back next week after 468, 69, 70 days. Totally different situation. Malnutrition, kind of injuries that they have sustained since they were kidnapped and not treated. Of course, living in great fear, living in a situation where you don't get to decide anything, including when not to go to the bathroom or to eat. So there's a whole mechanism preparing for that moment. In addition to those 33 hostages, Israel is paying a very, very high price. I'm talking about the release of 1,000 prisoners. The key for releasing the prisoners may give you an indication of the brutality and cruelty of Hamas, because the price of releasing an Israeli female soldier is higher, for example, than releasing an Israeli female civilian. So more terrorists sitting in prisons will be released for a soldier rather than for just an ordinary civilian. So we are talking about approximately 1,000 terrorists that will be released. Many of them have blood on their hands. Many of them have been sentenced for life sentences. Some even more than one life sentences. So this is something that will be very painful to many families. Imagine that you lost your husband or your child in a terrorist attack, in a suicide bombing attack, and that is now going to walk out. Obviously, this is a heavy price. And not only that, there's another aspect to it. Hamas is in dire need to rebuild its military capabilities. And when Hamas will receive those former terrorists, which have terror expertise, it will be easier for Hamas to rebuild its power. In addition to this, there's discussion on the Philadelphia corridor. For Israel, the Philadelphia corridor is a critical area because this is one of the two main smuggling routes to Gaza. This is on the border. This is an area on the border with Egypt. It's 14 kilometers long, and a lot of the ammunition that Hamas acquired came through this route. So, according to the agreement, Israel will keep presence in the Philadelphia corridor and will not leave it completely until the second phase will be reached. The other thing that the agreement speaks about is the Rafa Crossing. The Rafa Crossing is the crossing into Egypt. You know, everybody puts the responsibility on Israel always, but Gaza has two borders. There's Egypt and there is Israel. And for the Rafa Crossing, this is the lifeline for Gazans. They can go out, they can travel, they can visit relatives elsewhere in the world. So according to the agreement, after the entire amount of women hostages will be released, the Rafah border crossing will be open for transferring of wounded civilians. In addition to this, there will also be another heavy price that Israel will pay, and that is something that the people in the envelope of Gaza are dreading, and this is the return of the Gazans to the neighborhoods very close to the Israeli border. These are, Jason, the same areas from which in October 7th, 2023, 7,000 Palestinians, half of them are Hamas, stormed the borders. It's those areas that will be rehabilitated, reused for the purposes of civilians who will live there, and this is a part of the agreement. The last thing on the agreement has to do with the humanitarian aid. I want to go back to before the war. Before the war, there were 70 trucks a day with aid that entered Gaza. In the course of the war, this number increased between 150 to 250 trucks a day, depending on the needs on that specific day. The humanitarian aid is talking about 600 trucks a day. Now, Hamas in Gaza, at least the civilian part of Hamas, is still very much in control. And this means that they are still trying to control humanitarian aid. Not only they control humanitarian aid, they sell it overpriced to whoever they choose to sell, and they make millions out of this every month. So for Hamas, this is the greatest source part of the agreement. And last, I want to say, you know, sometimes it may seem that the families of the hostages, but that is not the case. The families are very much divided. There are protests in Jerusalem with families which reject the agreement. And of course, they turn their anger to Prime Minister Netanyahu. At the same time, there are families of hostages protesting in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, again calling Netanyahu to sign the agreement. So the people are divided. The reason is that many of the hostage families believe that the second phase will never be reached, that Hamas will pull out something that will, decide not to fulfill the agreements on its part. So they're concerned the second part of the agreement will never be reached, unfortunately. So the families, of course, there's no right and wrong answer. Israel will be a country. But this is part of, I think, of the story of living here and facing.
Avital, I think
great challenges.
your connection may be a little unstable, but we'll power through this. We missed a couple of words what you were saying just now, but we got nearly all of it. But let me go back to something else about that first phase. So you said that there will be basically 1,000 Palestinian security prisoners who will be released, some of them with Israeli blood on their hands, some of them sentenced to life sentences. Where will they go? Will they go back to Gaza? You made it seem as though these could be future Hamas fighters again. Will they necessarily be in Gaza, or could they be sent someplace else? What's the understanding? We seem to have a technical issue. Avital, I wonder if you're hearing me, we're not hearing you, if you could perhaps turn off the video and maybe we'll just hear your voice if that's the issue with the connection, which we're all accustomed to after 5 years of pandemic work online. Okay, we have just lost the connection with Avital. I think she's restarting. And in the meantime, we'll look forward to returning to our conversation with further detail about phase one, about phase two, about the wider implications of this deal, what it will mean for a weakened Hamas. It actually will be a weakened Hamas. Or will Hamas somehow reconstitute and stay in power in Gaza and continue to threaten the people of Israel and frankly the Palestinian people as well?
Jason, perhaps while we wait for Avital to return, she might return on her phone. I'm wondering, just given your experience, maybe in the region, if you've heard how this news is being taken in the Gulf and the wider Middle East area where where you often are actually taking these calls from. If there's anything you've heard from people, how this news is being received.
Sure. I mean, it's clearly there's a great relief on the part of some in the Arab world, feeling that this could be a ceasefire that could actually lead to the end of the war. But I think uncertainty about how this is going to play out over the coming weeks, as Avital points out, the second phase in particular is a very large question, I think, in the minds of many people across the region. Avital is back now. Let's see. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear it. I apologize for that. I don't know what happened exactly. I'm sorry.
Oh, much better now. So, okay, so I was about to ask you another question, and then we lost you. You were starting to talk about how the Israeli public was receiving this, in particular the hostage families. But is there a sense that I'm really wondering about the security threat posed to Israel by the security prisoners who are being released if they go back into Gaza, which could just bolster the depleted resources of Hamas, or whether they'll be sent someplace else. Is there a clear sense of that? And also, other aspects of this that affect the Israeli public. And also, I'm curious about the political implications within Israel of this deal.
Right. First of all, I mean, you're right to ask the question, because if I'm looking at the case of Gilad Shalit, the soldier that has been kidnapped also and held in Gaza for 6 years, then we know that those terrorists, those 1,000 terrorist prisoners who were released in return to Gilad Shalit, 40% of them returned to prisons. So I don't know if there is a saying, once a terrorist, always a terrorist, but our history shows us that there are great chances for terrorists to resume their activities. Yes, it's a concern. I'm not sure they will return, they will be permitted to return to the West Bank. I also know that part of the preparations has to do with the making sure that we won't see this parties on the buses of the prisoners returning, you know, rejoicing and celebrating their freedom in a very public way. So I know they're thinking about that as well. But as you know, that the Jewish values about returning hostages is something which is inherent, and Israel is willing to pay a very, very high price. At the end of the day, Israel has been fighting 7 fronts for the last 15 months, and some of these fronts are still very, very much active. So I think the hostages, if we can get to closure on the issue of the hostages, I think this will stabilize somewhat, at least the Gaza front. And I do want to say something else. We are not, as a country, are going to return to October 6th. So that naivety, that concept of economic wealth, economic well-being in Gaza equals less motivation to terror, that has been deleted. So the security concept is totally different today, and I hope it will be implemented in such a way that will return the security and safety. The challenge will be, although, Jason, with the people of the envelope of Gaza. Will they feel secure enough to return to their homes? I'm not sure that will be the situation. Many of them are still, most of them have still not returned. Many of them suffer from trauma. So that will be a big challenge to see. As for the political issue, and that's a big one, Smotrich and Ben Gvir are the two, I would say, opposing factors in Netanyahu's government. Now, Smotrich, and by the way, they're very different in their views, in the way they politically conduct themselves. It's not like a one kind of a system or a one-man show kind of behavior of both of them. It's very different. So as a reminder, Smotrich's party has 6 seats and Ben Gvir 7. And one is the Minister of Internal Security, the other Minister of Economy. Smotrich said that he is considering approving the first phase of the agreement. He didn't threaten like Ben Gvir to leave the government, or he spoke in a more, I would say, rational, from, if I can say that, about Smotrich, a rational perspective. Ben Gvir, however, said, we will not take down the government, but we will make sure that Netanyahu will give us what we need as a party. Now, here is the issue. The election of Donald Trump is a main factor here for both these political actors. They understand, they're looking at the appointments in the next administration, and they're seeing people and candidates, they're still candidates, that are in favor of the West Bank and support the settlements, and maybe are more aligned with their political direction. So they say to themselves, wait a minute, will I give this opportunity and knock down the government? So according to all the signs, the agreement will be passing politically on the cabinet and in the government. It will be a big majority for the agreement.
There was some talk about families of victims of terror perpetrated by some of the security prisoners who'll be released might try to go to court to block their release. Is that still a possibility?
Yes, according to the Israeli law, the process will be as follows. So tomorrow morning, as I understand, Netanyahu and the delegation will return from Doha, will update the cabinet. The cabinet will then vote and most likely approve the agreement. And then the Knesset, the entire 120 members of the Knesset, will meet. In that meeting, Netanyahu will present the price that Israel will be paying. The names of the prisoners, Jason, will be made public. They will appear on the website of the Ministry of Justice. According to the law in Israel, every single person who would like to appeal against the release of one of those individuals will be allowed to do so and appeal to the court. They will have 48 hours to do so. It could be an individual, it could be an NGO, it could be public figure, whoever. And this brings us into Sunday. So Sunday seems the most immediate first day in which the first hostage, the second and the third, 3 hostages on that day will be most likely released. So yes, people could appeal to the court. Hint, the court will not do anything with this. Of course, it will overrule it, and then we will proceed with the agreement as planned.
This deal is a hostage release and ceasefire arrangement. It's not just the hostages to be released. Over the next 6 weeks, there'll be a ceasefire. Does that mean the end of the war with Hamas? What's the expectation of Israel's continued need for security presence around or within the Gaza Strip? And does this deal in any way limit Israel's options?
So this is where it gets tricky, because the word ceasefire actually means that Israel will cease to fight in Gaza. Now, the Israeli policy is very accurate on this issue. The Israeli policy says that until the last hostage will not be released, then Israel still holds the right to continue and fight and operate in Gaza. So as I said, the first stage is 42 days and only 33 out of the 98 will be released. What about 65 additional hostages? And of course, Israel is interested in keeping this rule, so it will have some sort of a leverage for Hamas. Israel wants those 65 last hostages to be released on the second stage, and therefore it will not declare ceasefire until each and every one of them, dead and alive, will be returned to Israel. And only then there will be a ceasefire. I'm not sure it will be presented that way to the Israeli public for political reasons. And I am sure that Israel will have some security mechanism that will allow it to act. For example, what we are seeing today in the West Bank. We are seeing today areas in which terror has increased and grew. Terrorists are planning to infiltrate into Israel and commit terror attacks, and therefore either the Palestinian Authority arrest them or Israeli forces do. So there could be a situation.
Again, your service is interrupted. It seems. Oh, are you back? Are you okay?
I'm okay.
Yeah, there was a break in the connection there for.
Sorry about that.
Sure.
I want to say that the model of what we have now in the West Bank could be applied to Gaza. In other words, Israel will not be sitting inside Gaza, but in case there will be intelligence information indicating a certain terror activity, a launcher loaded with a rocket that is ready to be fired, then Israel will know to attack in pinpointed ways. So there are solutions also for that. Again, the big question is, will this bring back those 60,000 Israelis who left their homes more than a year ago? Will they return? I am not sure that will be the case.
But if for some reason, and maybe it's not easy to imagine, Hamas ceases military activity, there aren't launches of missiles or even preparations to launch missiles. Is there the possibility that all will be quiet in Gaza for the next 6 weeks, or does that seem to be a remote possibility?
You know, the word Hamas and cease military activity in the same sentence is something that I don't think any Israeli believes.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, last night, when the Prime Minister of Qatar held a press briefing, at the same time, Hamas suddenly wearing uniform because they were afraid to wear uniform until yesterday, march in the streets, armed and in their cars. So the ideology is still there. Hamas has been trying day and night, 24/7 to recruit 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds back to, to rebuild the platoons, the brigades, the battalions that have been eliminated by the IDF. So I don't see a situation that Hamas ceases to be. I can say that Israel achieved partially its goal, namely, crippling Hamas's military capability. But on the government side, no, not yet. I mean, we see still Hamas trying to reorganize communities. They have like a civilian law enforcement unit. They control the humanitarian aid and so on and so forth. So I cannot imagine a situation in which Hamas says, you know what, okay, we're crossing the lines, we're putting our weapons down, and that's it. I'm afraid not, but we can make sure that the smuggling routes are closed. We can make sure that any attempt to build or to rebuild a factory that produces rockets is eliminated. And for this, we need, of course, very good level of intelligence and different security mechanism.
And are there continuing efforts to search out tunnels that Hamas built under Gaza? Will that kind of activity, ground forces activity, continue, or will that be stilled for the next 6 weeks?
As I understand, after the second phase, there will not be ground activity on Gaza. There will be some sort of a buffer zone. The buffer zone will be between 500 and 700 meters from the Israeli-Gaza border. And it will be something like 60 kilometers long. So if you can imagine the Israeli map in your head, basically the entire area where the Israeli communities are will have this buffer zone. By the way, we had a buffer zone. We had a buffer zone of 500 meters, but on October 7th, we all saw what happened to the buffer zone. So this alone does not give the ultimate level of security that we need. It will have to be a component with a whole list of security elements.
Yeah, security elements that obviously were lacking on October 7th, 2023, or were overwhelmed and lacking. Let me turn actually also to the future of Hamas in Gaza and frankly, the future of Gaza. Does this deal lay the groundwork for reconstruction of Gaza, where a huge portion of the housing stock has been damaged or destroyed because of Hamas's cynical decision to embed its military infrastructure within the civilian population? What is the current expectation of how many internally displaced Palestinians will be able to house themselves? And will Hamas, however weakened it is, continue to rule, or rather misrule, Gaza?
Yeah, that's the big question. I'm looking at the list of the achievements because I'm hearing noises. By the way, some from the family, some from Israelis who say, and from outside of Israel who say, this is a terrible deal, and Israel is actually leaving Gaza as it entered. And that is not at all the case. And I do want to highlight the fact that there are many terrorists that have been eliminated. Sinwar is one of them. The prime minister is one of them. The 7 cabinet members. Others have escaped from the country. The police chief. There's a whole list of achievements that Israel did conduct. So there are a lot of achievements. However, on the civilian side, Israel is lacking. I have to say that it's still, Hamas still is controlling some areas, including distributing humanitarian aid and others. Israel tried to find local actors, Palestinians from Gaza, who are not associated with Hamas, and give them the task of leading Gaza to the next phase after Hamas. And unfortunately, it failed to do so. There were not volunteers. And one of the reasons for that is exactly what I said before, the civilian control of Hamas in some areas. You know that there are public executions by Hamas. Hamas, for the last couple of days, is conducting public executions of people in Gaza that spoke against Hamas in the streets. And today I watched Palestinian media, and I saw civilians glorifying Hamas, but not only that. They said, I mean, one woman, for example, said something which seemed outrageous. She said that she supports the repetition of October 7th every year. So you see, the situation is complicated in such a way that we don't see an immediate leadership, even not Palestinian Authority leadership, that is ready to come in and take Gaza to a different place. What we are seeing, by the way, is some components of the West raising money and agreeing to send to Gaza. For example, the EU announced today, the European Union announced today, just even before the agreement has been signed, announced today that they will pass 120 million euros for the renovation of Gaza. And I trust we'll see other Arab countries do so. I know the US allocated $95 million for that. By the way, just to give you an estimation, the total cost for renovating Gaza and supporting new homes, building new homes and so on, and public facilities and infrastructure is something around $60 billion. So this is a lengthy time period that will take, to get this to this stage. I do want to say that there are a lot of humanitarian groups on the ground representing countries. For example, the Emiratis have a whole mechanism of hospitals, which are working fantastically, by the way. And there are other organizations as well. So I assume that in the first stage, we will need to rely on these NGOs, on these organizations, on donating countries, at least so that the people there could get on their own feet.
I mean, what you report about the reaction of Palestinians, it kind of runs against what we were hearing a few months ago, maybe, about the polls that showed opposition to Hamas growing among the Gaza population, people holding Hamas responsible for the horror story that was inflicted on the region by what happened on October 7th. But has that turned around, or was that just not reflective of true opinion of the Palestinian population?
I think that what you are touching upon is the two sides, Israel and Hamas, unfortunately, I have to make an equation, are trying to create a narrative for the day after. And that's exactly what you're seeing with Hamas. Hamas is creating a narrative. I see the infographics, I see the clips. Basically, they are branding the last 15 months as a huge success, as a grander military success. And they called it a flood, Tufan in Arabic, Tufan al-Aqsa, the flood of Al-Aqsa. And the slogan they built is that the flood led to victory, to an amazing victory. And so they're now telling the story this way. But look, it was enough to see yesterday that in the West Bank, thousands of Palestinians went out to celebrate. And in Beirut, in Lebanon, the same. And in other Arab countries, Jordan and others, the same. So I think that this narrative will get stronger and stronger in the coming days, in the coming weeks, and a new story will be told by Hamas. I just wonder what will happen when they'll go back to their homes, or what was left from their homes and neighborhoods, because it will be very difficult for them to recognize the streets. But trying to sell it to the public like an amazing victory, this is something, of course, which is expected.
Yeah, I could understand celebrating a ceasefire, but celebrating a so-called victory after this enormous destruction brought upon the region by Hamas is unspeakable. I have one last question, then I think we have time for perhaps some questions from members of our Advocacy Anywhere audience. When I and my AJC colleagues have heard over the last year from Arab leaders with whom we've been in contact throughout this period, leaders from Abraham Accord states and those not yet in that circle of peace, new peace overtures and initiatives to advance Israel's integration of the region would have to wait until the end of the current war. It was just simply unacceptable, we were hearing. to their citizens to warm relations with Israel, while images of Gaza were all over the news. So is it your sense that this breakthrough has now arrived, or are we not quite there yet?
Well, I'm looking at the fact that the Abraham Accords brought a lot of fruit to Israel and to the region. And since the war started here, and many airlines cut their flights to Israel, including all the American airlines, which will never resume their flights, one country did not stop the flights, and that is the UAE. And the numbers of flights from Israel to UAE and back and forth, vice versa, I'm talking about almost 30 flights a week. Crazy. Now, even before the war, I can say that there were more Israelis who traveled to the UAE and less Arabs from those countries who came to visit Israel. So I'm not sure it has to do with the war itself. However, in this part of the world, I think that things can change very quickly. Assad fell within a few hours, and no one expected that to happen. And we have a new reality on the Syrian border. So I think things could still work for the best. I know that it's a joint interest of Israel and the other Arab Accord country members to further expand on these relations. We have a lot of common enemies. We have joint interests. We have economic interests. We have touristic interests. We have cultural interests. And I have no doubt that this will only increase and flourish in the future. No doubt whatsoever. And I also have no doubt that the Abraham Accords will further be expanded. And this is something that you and the rest of AJC has been advocating for many, many years. And for me as an Israeli to see it and feel it and be able to travel to an Arab country freely and enjoy these new relations is something that it's an integral part of my life. It's difficult to explain to someone who's living outside, but for us, it's a huge game changer. So definitely I foresee more of that.
I share your vision, and I also share your confidence that that's the direction we're going, and that AJC will continue to play an active role in all of this, particularly with our new Center for New Middle East, which we just announced a few months ago. I think at this point, Daniel, if there are questions from our audience, let's entertain a few.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Avital. Our first question from Sam May. What provisions are in place in the agreement to ensure the safety of hostages during and after their release? And how are future hostage situations expected to be handled given the precedent this agreement sets?
So that information has not been shared. I do know, however, that the Red Cross will have some involvement as it had in the past, a year ago. I think that Israel was very consistent in asking the names in advance. This was a precondition by Israel, because Hamas said, well, we don't know where the people are. We don't know where they are. We don't know if they're dead and alive. And keep in mind that we were bombarded with videos of hostages every single Saturday night by Hamas, trying to use psychological warfare. So obviously Hamas knows where the hostages are if they are videoing them every week. And Israel was very consistent in its demand. So there will be a list. It will be very clear who is released on every stage and every day and every minute. Because according to those release, only then the prisoners will be released as well. And Hamas at the end of the day wants to show an achievement. And what else can he show except the release of the prisoners? So that's how that's going to work. Of course, the secret services of Israel are involved in this. There are different paths of crossing, different possibilities of crossing into Israel, which are not disclosed. I can say that there are 4 hospitals that have been elected to treat the hostages, because that will be the second stop. The first stop will be in Israel with the families. There will be some either base or an area where the hostages could meet their families for the first time in 470 days. And then they will be probably flown to one of the hospitals due to a very tough medical condition that is expected to many of the hostages. I just want to add one thing before you go to the next question. I'm not sure that the condition of all the hostages is known to Israel. This is an issue of intelligence, and intelligence is never 100%. So while Israel does know the condition of a lot of the hostages, it doesn't know the condition of all of them. So with the happiness of the return of the hostages, there will be some, unfortunately, very difficult moments.
Yeah, I think we're all expecting that. Thank you, Avital. Daniel, other questions?
Yep. A question from Janice Ellen, and several other people have asked similar questions about how much of this deal or agreement is tied to Netanyahu's efforts, or is believed to be tied to Netanyahu's efforts to stay in power. If it plays a significant role, was there a reason why the deal was made now, or could there have been a more favorable agreement negotiated?
So the deal of now, or the agreement, I'd rather use the term agreement because it's people we're talking about, was actually prepared already and proposed on May 27. So almost all of the facts of this agreement have been already proposed then. And the Americans, by the way, American administration approved it in August. The only body which did not approve it was Hamas. So for 7 months, Hamas was not willing at all to make any progress, to agree to anything to this proposal. The last talks were taking place for a long time, for nearly a couple of months, but Hamas was not willing to budge. Hamas was not willing to make any concessions. They kept on repeating the same conditions, which is a complete stop of the war, retreating from Gaza, and so on and so forth. The same things that they have been repeating on and on. So it has really nothing to do with Netanyahu's political survival, which is very stable, especially after Gideon Sa'ar's party joined the coalition and increased the number of government members from 64 to 68. It has to do with Hamas. Now, what the question is a very right one. Why did Hamas now change his mind? And there are a few answers. One of them is the elimination of Nasrallah. The other one is the elimination of Sinwar. The third one is the elimination of Hania. And then there's the fall of Assad. So all of these kind of changes, dramatic changes, because these were major leaders in the Arab terror world. And the fact that Hamas stayed alone. And having said that, together with the very severe blow to the military capabilities of Hamas, almost the entire 24 battalions have been eliminated. This created, I think, the motivation for Hamas to move forward and agree to the proposal. Not immediately agree, of course, there were discussions, but for the first time to make progress and to agree to the proposal that was already suggested in May.
Is it the expectation, though, of the Israeli government that, assuming the three phases of this deal roll out as planned, that at the end of the day, Hamas will remain in control in Gaza?
So Israel does not want Hamas, obviously, to control in Gaza. The question is, what is the alternative? Looking at the Palestinian Authority, you see a very weak Palestinian Authority, not reformed, not revitalized. You don't see a younger generation who's standing in line, ready to replace the older generation of leadership. They're not there. And so I don't see a lot of motivation there or capability at this point of time. On the other hand, I don't see a lot of Arab countries willing to take the lead as well. So yes, the army will probably need to operate the humanitarian aid mechanism, at least at the beginning, until there will be an alternative mechanism in Gaza, in order to make sure that Israel plays its part in the agreement. That will have to be the first couple of weeks. It may be dragged into longer time, but yes, Israel will have to play that role, at least in the beginning. And believe me, Israel has no motivation to deal with sewage in Gaza or desalination of water or anything of those civilian issues. It's not something that, Israel needs because there are so many other fronts to deal with.
As you know, there are also, numerous day after plans that have been floated over the last year and a half, 15 months. But I guess we'll see whether we can actually get to the point where we can talk about the day after.
Right.
And
And as you know, the day after is not really a day, but rather many years after.
a decade or two, exactly. Daniel, I think we have time for another question, perhaps even two
We
more.
have time for a few more. And just going from that, Avital, we have a question from Odin Ozdil. What's the conversation regarding Saudi Arabia and other maybe more moderate Arab players to play a role in stabilizing a potential future Palestinian state?
Yeah, I mean, Saudi Arabia is finding itself in a situation that it could today increase its involvement in the Middle East. And now it needs to prioritize. Let's talk about Syria. There's a new government. As you know, the government met already Saudi officials, and Saudi Arabia is a leading candidate in rebuilding Syria. So from a Saudi perspective, it's very interested in the economic prospects in Syria. And then move to Lebanon, where a new president and a new minister have been elected a few days ago. Saudi Arabia was involved here as well. Saudi recognized the weakness of Hamas and the political the weakness of Hezbollah in Lebanon, and decided to take advantage of this weakness and try to also influence the election of the president of Lebanon. Now here too, there is a whole need of building and renovating and reshaping the country. And again, here, Saudi is interested too. So the question is, where exactly on the list of investments will Gaza be? I think it will be on the list. But the question is, who will be the other Arab players and how dominant, the games of power will be between all of them. And, the power games in the Arab world are very complicated. I want to say that on this specific hostage deal, you hardly heard about Egypt. And Egypt actually exerted a lot of pressure on Hamas to accept this agreement. But you saw Qatar in the front, in the headlines, in the press briefing. You didn't hear Egyptian officials, and Egypt has serious leverage on Hamas. For example, they control the Rafa Crossing and others. So the power games in the Arab world is quite complicated. From Saudi perspective, there are a lot of options in the Middle East. As for future peace relations, normalization relations with Israel, I think it's in the cards. I think that all sides are interested. I think it has to do a lot with the incoming administration in a few days, which we all understand here there's a priority. And definitely this is something that Prime Minister Netanyahu is very, very, very interested in promoting.
I think that might be the topic of a future webinar with you, Avital, and perhaps other colleagues as well. Daniel, I think maybe there's time for another question.
Sure. This from Richard Cohen and several others are asking about the impact on the southern communities. So from what you know, how is this agreement viewed by perhaps the currently displaced Israelis from the Gaza adjacent kibbutzim? And what does the agreement mean for the future of life for Israelis on the border?
So the biggest fear for everyone is that we'll never reach the second stage because Hamas can change his mind in the last minute, just like we saw today, because they acted that way before in the previous hostage agreement and suddenly didn't deliver who they were supposed to deliver in the right day, in the right time that was set in advance. So these kind of things, because we are dealing with a vicious terror group. So there is a big fear that we'll never make it to the second stage. And therefore, these are communities that lost even up to 10% of their people. And so the community is not whole. Many of them are in different apartments. Some are together in a certain community in a different town, but a lot of them are spread in many areas, and they don't feel whole until those hostages will return, the additional 65 in the second phase. So many of them say that they want an agreement that will release everyone at once. Obviously, Hamas is against that. That is their position. In terms of returning gradually to their homes, I have to talk for a minute about the resilience of the Israeli people, because there are so many individuals who decided to go to the southern communities, and at their own expense, at their own time, they're renovating, they're cleaning, they're painting those houses which are deserted for 15 months so that they will be ready in case those people want to return. We're talking about 60,000 people. There is a very small percentage that returned, but obviously this is not a quiet area. There have been some rocket fire from Gaza in the last couple of weeks. And so you can imagine the trauma that any siren indicating a rocket launch can actually have on children, on elderly, and everyone actually. So we're not there. We're not quite there in terms of returning those 60,000 people to their homes. I assume there will be a percentage that will not return, 20% maybe, that will not return. In any case, we're looking at least 1 or 2 or 3 years from now, because the whole infrastructure needs to be rebuilt there.
Thank you, Avital. Daniel?
Sure, I'll ask one final question. I guess, Avital, maybe sort of where you started, which is over the next 24, 48 hours, what should we be in the audience be kind of keeping an eye on to make sure this plays out in the way that we hope and expect it to play out?
Try to imagine, I'm asking everyone to try to imagine what goes in the minds of these parents and spouses and partners who are just sitting at home and waiting for some kind of an announcement tomorrow, and then maybe information that their loved ones are returning. And then try to imagine that they're not sure if they're alive or dead, and if they're alive, what condition they're in. There were many rumors about women that have been consistently raped, for example. And of course, medical deprivation and lack of nutrition, malnutrition, and a lot of other issues as well. I think that there will be a lot of tension in Israel over the coming Shabbat, over the coming weekend. Sunday, I think people will just stop their lives and stop their breath and be anxiously waiting to see the 3 first hostages that will cross the borders from Gaza to Israel. Then we'll know that we are on the right track, that we are in the right direction. So that is the atmosphere I expect. I can tell you that the issue of the hostages is everywhere in our lives. It's in the streets with yellow flags. It's in the supermarket, in the self-checkout counter. It's on the playlist on the radio station, and the playlist of the hostages, songs that they liked. And this is a 24-hour kind of thing. So the hostages issue, it doesn't matter if it's a bad deal or a good deal. It doesn't matter, because this is not a scientific issue. There is no right and wrong answer here. But it is a scar on the Israeli society. And that scar needs to be healed. And I hope we'll see that healing begin in 48 hours.
We share that hope, Avital. This has been such an important discussion. Your information is cherished by us. The people of Israel have been wounded by what's happened over the last 15 months. We've all been wounded, and we are with you. And we have the same hope that you have, that the gates will open, and your sons and daughters and children and parents and relatives and friends will start coming home from this terrible captivity, this brutality. We're with you. We thank you very much for what you've contributed to this conversation. Daniel?
Thank you, Avital. And thank you, Jason, for today's AJC Advocacy Anywhere program. And thank you to our global audience for tuning in. To stay up to date on the ever-evolving situation, make sure to follow AJC on social media at AJC Global. You can find more resources and ways to take action at ajc.org/Israel-at-war. We're very regularly adding new materials and updates. And finally, if you haven't already, we encourage you to sign up today for AJC Global Forum, the premier global Jewish advocacy conference taking place in New York City from April 27th through 29th. You can register at ajc.org/global forum. The link is in the chat. And to keep doing this important work, we really need partners and advocates like you to join us. It's your platform for Jewish activism, and the time really to act is now. Avital, our hearts are in Israel today and every day. I'm Yisrael Chai, and hope to see you again soon.